The Houthi regime, it's a, as you say, a terrorist group. It's a whatever group. It's certainly not a formed government. Are going to need to be strongly hit for this, and there'll be a whole load of strike packages coming up.
The cabinet we're seeing cabinet's going to be meeting in just over an hour's time. Going to be talking its thought about the situation in Yemen and the possibility of Britain, America, and other countries in alliance to conducting strikes against the Yemen rebels. There's been a discussion at Cobra. There's been a discussion at the National Security Council. It looks very imminent. What do you think?
I'm certain it is, John. The Bab al-Mandab takes 14% of all maritime traffic. 30,000 ships a year go through the Bab al-Mandab into the Red Sea and onward or either way through the Suez Canal. It's a hugely important international maritime route. It's been heavily disrupted. Actual attacks and, of course, a lot of deterrence is pushing people to go around the Cape of Good Hope. The Houthi regime, it's a, as you say, a terrorist group. It's a whatever group. It's certainly not a formed government. Are going to need to be strongly hit for this, and there'll be a whole load of strike packages coming up. The Saudi Arabians, of course, have been conducting a very long-running war against the Houthis down there. There was always a chance that it would spill over into a threat to the maritime trade, and of course, it's linked to the Iranians who use them as proxies. They're not direct proxies, but there's a lot of influence and a lot of expertise comes from Tehran and the Quds Force. And we've just seen, of course, the taking of a tanker by, we suspect, the Iranian Navy, maybe IRGC, off Sohar in the just outside the Strait of Hormuz. So the linkages are there, but it's a dangerous time and it's going to be escalatory. The Houthis are very much a law unto themselves.
Indeed, fragile and really quite scary. Another feature of the whole thing is that in Yemen, the civil war with the government, as it were, backed by Saudi Arabia, Britain helping to arm that effort, of course, rather controversially, and the Houthis backed by Iran. That looks as if it was coming to, if not a conclusion, but maybe some sort of peace. And now this, if it comes to firing British forces and American forces and so on in action against the Houthis, what are the military options? What might actually be happening?
Well, there'll be a huge amount of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance at the moment, John. The drones will be, all over the firing bases. They'll know exactly where the helicopters are that the Houthis used to do an attack on one of the ships earlier on. They should know most of the launchers, although these are very unsophisticated drones in many ways, not that dangerous up to a point. So one would expect to have a strike at all the fast boat harbours they've got, certainly to strike all the helicopter assets. And the problems with the Houthis, of course, and we saw it in Afghanistan, is suddenly they'll find that the balance of power in their own internal civil war begins to shift to the elements of the Yemenis that are supported by the Saudi Arabians. So it's quite interesting how this can play out. And the Houthis are going to have to take a view about whether they either want to respond to Iranian prompting to be a nuisance, whether they want to do it independently, or whether they are prepared to get hit and then settle back into conducting their, the ghastly civil war they've got going within Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, in a sense we can't know this, but what would you guess? The Houthis, the way this has been going with a major air offensive just in the last 24 hours, they don't look as if they're remotely interested in backing off, do they?
No, not really. I think, as I say, John, it's a question of whether you strike them hard enough that it changes the balance of power within the civil war in Yemen. And you know how complex that is, very tribal, but the Sunnis of the South Aden, former British colony, the Hadramat, are really in opposition to the Shia religious confessional background to the Houthis, supported by Iran. So it's part of a bigger game, and it links all the way back to the 7th of October. This element of what the Houthis are doing, and what Iran's trying to do to sort of broaden the interference in the region. So in some ways, you've got to hit the Houthis, but you've got to make it clear to the Iranians that there are consequences for using their proxies in this manner in a way that's very, very, very significant in stopping the free movement of maritime trade.
I wonder, is there a dimension here that there's concern, or maybe could be concerned, should be concerned about domestic security? If this escalates there, is there any greater risk of terrorism spreading towards this country? I mean, there are people capable of doing that.
Yeah, there certainly are, John. I mean, most of the people like Al Qaeda, Islamic State, and most of the jihadi groups are Sunni fundamentalists. The Houthis are a branch of Shiism, viewed as heretics by the bulk of the Sunni world. It's not to say people could not conflate the fact that they are Muslims and therefore, join the dots up with Syria, join the dots up with Muslim Brotherhood, Syria, with Gaza, etc. So undoubtedly, it's volatile. We've got this huge parade, I understand, or whatever, on Saturday about Palestine, Gaza, and the danger of people who don't really understand the region terribly well they'll conflate it as a Western attack on Muslims to an extent without any real understanding of where the Houthis sit within this mosaic.
And just lastly and briefly, the seizure of this tanker was flying under a Greek ownership, but it was seized previously by America, seized now by the Iranian Navy under government orders. Is that a further worrying development?
It's very worrying, and the whole maritime sector is very nervous, John. 90% of all trade in the world by volume comes by sea. There's about 5 real choke points, one of which is the Bab el-Mandeb Red Sea, and the other one is the Strait of Hormuz. Both of them are being tackled at the moment, and there will be economic consequences unless people have the confidence that maritime trade can be conducted freely and safely. So it will be interesting to see which way the policymakers decide to respond to Iran. Funnily enough, in this case, there's a sort of deterrent aspect from the Americans and the Chinese, who are very dependent on oil and gas coming out of the Strait of Hormuz, will be very worried about any interruption to energy flows from that part of the world. So they're also in a position to put pressure on Tehran not to escalate, certainly in the Gulf.
All right, good to talk to you, General. That is Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, the former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff, in our briefing room this evening.